Video game popularity has soared during the pandemic as people sought to distract themselves and find new ways to connect with their family and their loved ones. And as parents, it's that natural way that we worry about gaming and playing games and what they are doing to our children. And we were talking about this during the week with a child psychologist, and the conversation was so great, and I learned so much from him. But joining us now over the phone, we're speaking to Andy Robertson, who's an author and a journalist and head of Taming Games, the family video game database he's created to help parents, carers and guardians gain a deeper understanding of video games. Andy, welcome to the show. Now,
Hello.
this is our at-home section, and increasingly what has happened in our home, particularly over the last 2 years, is how we have connected to that space is that it's become our playground, it's become our office, and it's become the place that we escape to. And inside all of that, all of this technology has facilitated this while the outside world was kind of locked down to us. And so tell me a little bit about the journey that you've encountered to getting to this point, and why it is you created this body of work.
Yeah, I think, with various lockdowns and, like you're saying, spending more time at home, that space is under pressure, and our kind of connections outside the home kind of diminished. And so children in particularly have been using video games to stay in touch with school friends. And I have 3 kids, and that's something that they did. And at first, like probably other parents, I was a little bit like, is this good? Should I be limiting it? But actually what I realized and what I saw in their behavior was that this was a really effective way for them to keep up those friendships and those connections with other kids like they would in the playground. But as well as that, some of the kind of the stories and the interactions that these games were creating were actually offering kind of quite a calming and a reassuring space for them, a bit of escapism, but also, some really nice activities that I found kind of really encouraging. And so a lot of the work I've done is trying to help parents sort of play a role in this space rather than sort of move from the natural and understandable concerns and fears to getting a bit of literacy about what games are available, and then finding games that really suit their children really well and making it something that is kind of anchored in family life. And that's been, it's been a really rewarding thing to be able to do with mums, dads and guardians.
And so, take us through the journey of your life too. Like, let's rewind this track all the way to your sort of childhood and playing into adulthood. What was it that you were doing when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up in the sort of 90s era, and so kind of games was more of a peculiar hobby. So not everybody played. And it was seen as something that kids did kind of in their bedrooms, and often it was kind of a male thing rather than something else. But I think I had that kind of, playing games, when you experience them firsthand, you discover something that is quite precious. And so some of those experiences, even just on my own playing a game or connecting with friends, we used to get our computers and like original Xbox together, and we'd cart them over to someone's house along with a TV for each Xbox, and then play a game by hooking them up on a sort of a local network, the sort of thing that you could now just do instantly by going online. But some of those are kind of really nice, now quite sentimental moments from my childhood that when I see my kids playing online, I can kind of understand it through that lens that, I get it. This is kind of quite a precious thing going on. And again, when I'm talking to other parents in the work I do and in the book, it's trying to help them navigate that, whether they have got that kind of sentimentality about video games or whether it's actually, they're a bit worried about, are they just playing too much and shouldn't they be limiting it, that kind of conversation.
Do you know, Andy, I completely hear you. We're the exact same in life path right now. Grew up in the 90s, 3 kids, just still not trying to recognise that I am the adult in the room. How did that happen? Yeah. How did I become the person that is now in charge of all of this? The thing that always strikes me in this, and this is why I wanted to kind of fold this into in the home, the way that our homes have evolved is completely different to how I remember growing up. And you've just said something that is very evocative of that if I wanted to watch something or if I wanted to do something, particularly in those days, if I wanted to go and play California Dreams, I'd nip upstairs and it would be a solo sport, right? And you'd kind of be immersed in that world on your own. But as we have moved through not even that much time, like it's not even been 20 years or so. You know, when you think about it in sort of relative terms between the noughties and the now, and you know, being sped up by the fact that we did have a lockdown. How home now works is everything almost feels like it's infringing each other, isn't it? And that's the other added stress inside this, that inside kids' bedrooms, yes, you can do that, but let's be real, you're not really going to be gifting a £300 to £500 console and whatever the screen is to each kid the way that in the 90s we got gifted, you know, a wee second-hand TV and, you know, a relatively cheap console. The exponential amount of money in that is really, really different. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it is, although there are now many more ways to play. So the kind of kids will cruise different devices and they might have an older one of these Nintendo 2DS, 3DSs, or they might have a smartphone, whether that's a hand-me-down or a tablet, or maybe like a Chromebook that they use for school. And so in all those places, they can play games. And so what I like to kind of suggest to families, if they're going to invest in something, then, you know, get something that's really good, but get it in the sitting room. And it kind of is this then appointment playing, you know, a little bit like we used to gather around to watch shows on TV. But it can be like, oh, it's Saturday, so we're going to get together and play the game that we've chosen for our family. And again, you're kind of anchoring the conversation then. So it's not something that happens away from you, because there is that tendency with so many ways to play that kids kind of, you know, they'll migrate and they'll be off on their own playing something, which isn't bad, but it's just nice to get in on that as a parent.
Yeah, totally, Andy. And you've just said something. The phrase is so lovely. Appointment playing is exactly that. And you know, before I am that kind of, I'm going to sound like a crazy dinosaur, even though it was the 90s. But I remember when we first got cable in our house. You know, we'd gone from having 4 channels because it was before Channel 5 launched, and then Mum and Dad going, right, okay, maybe we should get this thing called cable TV. And it changed my life because MTV entered my orbit. It was like, yes, yeah. Amazing. But then actually what happened was in those days before that, we're all congregating, like you said, in the one room. And then I found that when I wanted to go and do something, I went off and did it. But with gaming, You've just said that thing. It does bring everybody back into the same room, and this competing for space inside your space can be difficult. And the thing that I wanted to talk about with you is that you sound like a very generous parent in terms of you want to do these things and you want to game with them. The hard thing for me as a parent is I'm like, oh, this is like something I'm not really that into, and I'm doing it for them, you know. And so trying to get absorbed into, like, I look at the stuff that we have sitting on my antique oak dresser. This is going to sound ridiculous, right? But I see this gorgeous antique that's 100 years old, and then I see all these lumps of new technology and equipment with wires hanging off of it, and I'm like, get out of my living room. I don't want to look at this every single day. So there is this sort of multi-generational a clashing of cultures that are happening in a room that is meant to be dedicated to the family, and bending and weaving in and out of all of that, because there's no getting around how ugly this stuff is and how much it sinks some members of your family into it for hours. How do you deal with the grumpiness after, when you were doing this appointment playing? How do you deal with it when it's in that communal space? Because there, you know, it's easy for us as adults to go, right, okay, we're putting a time limit on this. What we do with the kids actually is I kind of follow this Dr. Dawn Menken's psychology. If you've never heard of her, by the way, everybody should Google her. She's written a book called Raising Parents, Raising Kids. It's tremendous. So she says that the root of most arguments and kid-parent conflict comes from that, hey, you need to get off the computer now. And then a 2-second thing elapses, and you as the parent have given a clear instruction, but you're getting annoyed because it's not happened. But what the kid is experiencing is you've just interrupted them in the middle of something that they're about to try and finish, but that takes some time. And the conflict arises in those 3 or 4 minutes where the child thinks it's completely acceptable, and by the way it is, for him just to finish the process of what it is that he's doing, whereas the parent is like, you're not listening to what it is that I'm saying and I need you to stop immediately. So she puts these buffer zones around of, for the parent, you give a warm up to this. So you say, hey, in 10 minutes time, even though it might not be 10 minutes time, in 10 minutes time, we're going to stop that. And then you continually, in 5 minutes time, this is going to stop. In 3 minutes time, this is going to stop. In a minute and a half, this is going to stop. And I swear to God, that did change my life in terms of being able to maneuver the come down, that sort of crash from being digitally stimulated as a child to doing the task that you wanted them to do. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think, a big part of being parents in all areas of a child's life is kind of interpreting behaviour as communication. So when a child finishes the game, and maybe, whether they've had the warning or not, and however that ends, they might still end up being very grumpy. But being there as a parent who has tried the games and has an idea of what they are, you can play this role of helping them interpret what they're experiencing. Because as a young child, they don't have those skills themselves, and that means that you start to help them sort of navigate what was happening in the game that meant that it ended and it wasn't satisfying. Like, could you play a different game, or could you play this game differently? Who were you playing? And so suddenly the conversations you're having about these games is very different. And also you can recognize, like you're saying, I love that story. It kind of highlights this thing that actually if a child is reluctant to finish, they might be doing some really quite nice etiquette work. Like they really want to wrap up and say goodbye to their friends. They don't want to let the team down. And so they're looking after the other people that they're friends with. And it reminds me, if I'm on a phone call and if my wife's cooked, she's saying, it's time to eat. She won't expect me to immediately finish that phone call. She knows, because we understand phone calls, that I'll wrap up and I'll say, when should we talk again? It'll be nice to chat to you. And it's easy to miss that in a video game. But I think there's that really lovely kind of thing that as a parent stepping into that world, having played some games yourself, then you can kind of help them interpret it. And there are some games which actually the families I work with, that sort of the parents can become as keen to play them as the kids, but it takes some time to find what those games are. And they're not necessarily the ones that you see advertised on bus stops and in a cinema. They're kind of often the smaller kind of indie games made by smaller teams, but actually offer some really different experiences around themes and topics which aren't just shooting other players, and maybe are about cooking or fishing or building a cottage in the countryside. And to do that as a family together, as you're saying, as an appointment once a week, can become something that it kind of helps us put up with the big lumps of plastic on our nice furniture.
I don't know if that's true, Andy. I think I might have to go into some kind of interior workshop and work on this, or call Xbox myself and be like, can you make a wooden container that still takes the signal to and fro? Because I can't look at these big lumps of plastic. They drive me crazy in my room.
Put them in the drawer out the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but the kids are like, where's it gone? I'm best just to leave all the wiry spaghetti junction out and just take the hit for the team on the aesthetic on the living room. That's what I think. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us on the show. And please, do you know what? Will you come back on the show sometime?
Yeah, I'd love to. That's been great. I've loved hearing your stories as well about your gaming and your family. So I've learned something as well. It's great.
Thanks, Andy. Well, listen, let's keep that sharing. We'll get you on sometime soon, because I need all the parenting help that I can get, let me tell you, and the interiors help too. Right now, it's 27 minutes past 12.